Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to 50 by 50. Whatever happened to the Harvard class of 1976? We're about to find out. I'm your host, Michael Conniff, and this podcast is happily taking on a life of its own. Today, I am thrilled, really, to welcome Joel Feldman to the podcast. Hey, Joel, great to see you.
Hey, Mike. Good seeing you.
You and I were in our great friends, but we haven't seen each other in a while. I don't think we've actually seen each other since Richmond upset Indiana in the NCAA basketball tournament, the biggest upset in history to date.
Who could forget that?
Was that 91 or something like that? It was something like that. It was a
I don't know. Yeah.
it was a great game a long time ago, but it's great to see you. And I've read your red book. And I've got to say, I think you've got, one of the more amazing stories because one of the things that's come up in these podcasts is sort of elitism, distribution of income, economic justice, all those kind of things. And you're a guy, and I basically what I was saying is like you end up where you start in America today, right? You know this because you have a background in labor. You have been an entrepreneur in pharmacies, all kinds in hotels now.
Yeah.
But typically when we were, in college, I think you and I both believed, and we ended up working for Birch Buy with Bobby Gordon, Birch
Yeah.
Buy for President Bobby Gordon, Andy Weber. I think your gang,
Yeah.
all your buddies, right? And you were the campaign manager. You stuck me in Quincy, Mass.
Well, you and me together. We're in
You and me.
Quincy, Mass.
Yes, and you know what the most important thing you taught me?
What?
Don't spend your money on soda. Just get water. It's not worth it. And you were right. And to this day, I never
Yeah.
get soda. So, but
Me neither.
yeah, I believe that. But the thing I'm driving at is that I was in prep school. I was in the silk stocking district of New York. I came from privilege, not as privileged as some, but it was definitely privilege. And you
Yeah.
came from no privilege. You came from Duquesne, Pennsylvania, and there's an amazing story I'd love you to tell about how you won the newspaper scholarship and got to the Hill School and then to Harvard from there. So I'd love you to tell us how that came about.
Well, Mike, I was thinking about this, having watched a number of these now, and they've been fantastic. And I was thinking how many people that you've interviewed, and obviously no one more than you has a background in newspapers, both personally and your families.
Yeah,
And so do I, but in a different way,
it's a little different.
a little different.
So
Yes.
how did you start in newspapers?
Well, I was 10 years old, and a family friend's son had the newspaper route and he was giving it up. So I said, I'd like to do that. And so at 10 years of age, I began delivering the Pittsburgh Press. And, it was 70 or 75 dailies and 105 Sundays.
Just went out of
And it
business,
was,
didn't it, Joel? It just went out of business.
oh, yeah, a while ago. The Post Gazette just went out of
Okay.
business. The Press was the afternoon paper.
Oh yeah.
So I had a little easier. I would get home, from school and deliver the papers.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I did that. And, it was every day you do, up these hills and and I would throw the papers, Mike. I would fold them. I wasn't one of these guys who used rubber bands. I folded that newspaper and threw it.
And did you had like a red flyer cart, one of those classic
for
carts?
for su- for Sunday papers.
Yeah.
For the daily, I wore the bags.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like a Mexican bandito with two bags strung over my shoulders.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so there was a flyer, a little circular that the press would send to all the newsboys, and it would come once a month, once every 2 months, and it would one of the stories that they would run occasionally was that the newspaper would provide opportunities for newsboys to meet with, uh, to have the opportunity to apply to prep schools, to private schools.
That just seems
And
so random. I've never
it,
heard that anywhere else. Have you?
no, no, I didn't. I mean, I never met anyone else that got, was affiliated with that. So, yeah, so, what did I know? And my mother sends it in. Unbeknownst to me, I would never send it in. I was okay. I was happy. What did I know? I was happy being in Duquesne,
Sure.
and she sends it in, and we get a letter from the newspaper that they would like me to come down. And I don't know how many other newsboys came down, but we drove down from Duquesne into Pittsburgh, which was like 15 miles, and we went into the it's the first time I had ever been into the Pittsburgh Press, into the headquarters, and out on the card table, they had laid out all of these catalogs from different boarding schools.
Hmm.
Well, so there was one from Shadyside, which was in Pittsburgh, which I had heard of, and I think one from Exeter, which every people had heard of. I don't know if you heard from it on television or someone, but there was one from this school called the Hill School, and it was in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. And I remember walking over to my mother saying, "Isn't Pottstown near Philadelphia?" She said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, it's Pennsylvania. I'll apply to that one." And as it turned out, it's the only one I applied to because they waived the application fee for kids applying for scholarships. And so I sent in so anything that's the one I chose. About a couple of weeks later, they said they were coming to interview and they would like to interview me. So I ended up interviewing with this guy, Mike, who was uh, the wrestling coach. He was really a renowned coach. Like Hill School used to have fabulous wrestling teams. And I
He'd
don't know.
say, took one look at you and said, "You're no wrestler."
Exactly. I couldn't, to this day, I can't figure it out. But somehow he liked me, right? So I interview with him, and a couple of weeks later, we get a letter saying they would like us to come up to the school to interview me. Well, as it turns out, my high school basketball team, which was playing way above its class at that time, I think there were only 500 kids in the high school, makes it to the semifinals of the Western Pennsylvania Championships. And the game is on Friday night, and the interview is supposed to be Saturday morning. And I tell my parents, I'm not, I'm going to the game. It's, I'm going to the game. So the brat I was, I go to the game, and I'll never forget 11 o'clock. I come home. My dad says, "We're going." And we get in the car, and he drives across the state of Pennsylvania, through the night. We get into Pottstown, Pennsylvania about 6 in the morning. And I have this interview at 9 o'clock. And as I mentioned in the Red Book, I get a tour. And the tour is by this guy, Ken Chang, an Asian American I had never met. The only Asian American I had ever seen was there was one Chinese restaurant in downtown Pittsburgh, which we would go to, and that's what you saw, And so we take the tour, and I interview with the director of admissions, and at that point, the director of admissions says to me, Joel, we would like you to come here and we would like to offer you a scholarship, but you would have to repeat the ninth grade. And he said, I'm going to walk out of the room and I'm going to let you talk this over with your
Mhm.
parents. And then I'm going to come back and you can make a decision. And my dad was the sweetest guy, Mike. He never asked me to do anything. And he walks over to me. He says, just say yes. He said,
Good
just say
for
yes. He said, you can change your mind, but just say yes. And I said yes. And it changed my life, changed the
yeah.
course of my life.
So you
You
were
know?
a little Jewish kid from Duquesne making $10 a week,
Yeah.
delivering 100 plus Sunday newspapers and 70 during the day, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
became your ticket to ride, which is amazing. So I know that you
Exactly.
struggled a bit at Hill School. It's in your Red Book
Yeah.
summary. But what I'm really curious is how did a guy like you no prep school background, no private school background, nothing. You end up getting elected class president.
You know what,
How did that
Mike?
happen?
You'll have to ask Giles.
Well, Giles Whalen and the late Jeff Moley were at Hill with you. Um,
Right.
yeah, I will ask Giles, but you don't
I
have.
don't know. I don't know how.
Why?
You know,
Do you remember what?
I actually paid everybody $10 that from the newspaper route.
Right, right, right. No, it's funny. In my life, I found so many times. I've been in situations where a bunch of people are sitting around saying, "Hey, somebody ought to run, or somebody ought to do this, or somebody ought to do that," and I am frequently the one who says, "Well, I'll do it." What the hell? So amazingly, you get to Harvard, and at Hill when you started, you were fish out of water. Was it the same way at Harvard when you got there? Was that any better?
Uh, it was better because obviously I had been exposed to it. Uh,
Through
you
law
know,
school, yeah.
yeah, I mean, it was such a culture shock when I went to Hill, and at Harvard it was a little different. But in boarding school, you're in a cocoon,
Yeah.
uh, and once you get to Harvard, it's completely different. And yeah, sure. I always felt that I think I worked every semester, except when we were doing the political stuff.
Hmm.
So I always had to subsidize myself because I didn't really want to lean on my parents at this point. I was on scholarship. It wasn't a full scholarship.
Yeah.
And so I always worked. So I always felt that I sort of was, money was tight. And
Sure.
you had classmates who could do a lot of things that you couldn't do. And that's just the way it was.
Yeah. Did you apply to a final club?
Yeah, I was in the speed club for a
Yeah, this is
while
the
and
first
then
time
dropped out.
I've mentioned, or no, maybe one other time, but I was not in a final club. I actually was kind of opposed to them, though almost all of my friends were in them. But I think they may have gotten rid of them, or that's somebody else can tell us when we get to Cambridge. But were you in the speed club with the other people I knew?
Well, like Belmont and I went in it.
Mike
We were
Belmont.
roommates. Yeah, and then I can't remember who else from like the group of friends. But I did feel ultimately there that it was no, this wasn't the place for me. And I think by junior year, I think I just dropped out by the second semester.
Yeah. Your friends. So I want to ask you this: what? So as a Jewish kid at Harvard, right? Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
I always felt that you gravitated toward other Jewish kids, not solely, but the names I think of.
right.
And correct me, I'm not even sure. I don't even know if these people are all Jewish, but Bobby Gordon, Ted Feldman, um, uh, Annie Weber, I don't think was Jewish.
No, 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 definitely not.
Yeah, definitely not Jewish. But did that
Yeah.
what and Belmont? So
Yeah.
how important was that to you at Harvard? Was that a factor?
Uh, no, I think in just some ways, culturally, a lot of times you have the same sense of humor or
Sure,
things like that. No, that wasn't.
that
And,
was
and Mike, when I in Duquesne, I think we were the last of the Jewish families. I mean, there were very few, and by the
oh,
time that I left, that was it. So did that just happened, I think. But
yeah.
we were good friends, so you
Yes, you and
know,
I, and I'm not Jewish, though. My wife is 25% Ashkenazi, so
yeah,
that and married a Jewish guy and had Jewish kids essentially. So that's
yeah.
and my these are my Jewish bona fides. My brothers married a Jewish woman, and their son Asher Conniff is made it to the top 10 in the World Series of Poker. How about that?
Get out.
How about
Really?
that? Yeah, he's a really good
That's
poker player.
unbelievable.
Never went to school. So anyway, here's the thing. So you're at Harvard, and I have to spend a little time on senior year. Um, my senior it was. I'm trying to remember if it might have been. anyway, it doesn't matter. We got it. You got involved in the Birch Buy campaign, and I
Right.
remember the late Bobby Gordon was extremely involved too, right? He
Well,
might have been. He was a level above you, right?
yeah, he got in. I think he took the year off, and he was very involved. As was this guy Mark Roosevelt, if you remember, who
Oh
was a year
God, I do
behind us.
remember Mark. Was he in our class?
He was a year behind us, I think.
And he was an actual Roosevelt.
Yeah, and the crazy story is he would later go on to become the superintendent of the Pittsburgh Public Schools.
Oh my God, what are the odds?
Yeah,
What are the odds?
yeah.
So why did you get involved? And I'm trying to remember what your pitch was to me. You didn't probably have to pitch me very hard. I was up for it.
I don't know. We were all sort of politically active, right? It was just post Watergate, and Ford had pardoned Nixon, and it was we were college kids. It was exciting. It was a time where you really thought, wow, this things could change, and he was a good. He seemed like a good candidate. I remember he had put through a couple of amendments, like the Equal Rights Amendment he was for, and that he had sponsored. And, he was a union Democrat. I was into unions. I think you were into unions, or at least we're very sympathetic to the cause. And he seemed like a natural. We were wrong.
He was the leftmost candidate. He was the most liberal candidate, and in my opinion, he maybe Mo Udall you might put in there,
Well,
but
I think wasn't Fred Harris? Didn't Fred
oh,
Harris
you're
run
right.
as
You're
well?
right. Fred Harris was to the left of everybody. You're right about that.
Yeah, yeah,
Anyhow,
yeah.
he got you. So you recruited me to go with you to Quincy, and I really enjoyed that. I really did, and I thank you for that. And it was a great experience for me. I barely got readmitted back into school. I think they readmitted me. I had to go to the tutor at Elliott House,
Really?
Laura Gordon Fisher. They readmitted me on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, where I would have had to.
That was only fitting for you
Yes, yes. Obviously, that there were, God has a plan, right? And that was the plan. I was going to get back in. So I
on
barely.
St. Patrick's Day, no less.
What's that?
On St. Patrick's Day, no
On St.
less.
Patrick's Day, and so I got back in. So all's well that ends well. And I did talk to. I remember you remember Joe Grand Maison, who was a
Oh, sure.
very prominent guy from New Hampshire, and Joe. And John Dorfman, by the way, does a great Joe Grand Maison imitation if you get a chance. But Joe Grand Maison said, "Well, if you want, you can come with the Udall campaign." Like he actually offered me a job, which was really nice of him, and not what I necessarily expected. But I said, I better get my degree. I better get.
Well, Mike, because I had sophomore standing when I came there, so I graduated essentially after the first semester, but I didn't. I stayed in, and he hooked me up with the Udall campaign.
Oh, he did.
Yeah, so I went out to Wisconsin after that and worked for Udall, and that was the famous primary where NBC declares Udall the winner, and then as the votes trickle in from the farm country in Wisconsin, Carter pulls it out, and that was essentially the end of Udall.
Yeah, and the beginning of Carter for sure.
Right, right.
And I was, Joel, I was sympathetic to labor. And as I mentioned here before, I don't know if you even know this, but I ended up being the treasurer of the Boston Herald Labor Union, AFL
Yeah.
CIO Local 21432. And I have to, the Birch Buy experience probably had something to do with that. I'm sure. But you also were sympathetic to labor. But after Harvard, did you know what you wanted to do after these campaigns? Did you know?
Well, I ended up going to law school at Pitt. I went back home to law school at Pitt. And, I probably had at a certain point aspirations to think that I would run at some point in the
Oh, really?
future.
Never,
Yeah, but
never too late. Never too late.
no, 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 believe me, too late. And I wouldn't want to in this environment, Mike.
Yeah,
It's really, yeah,
yeah. It'd be bad.
it'd be bad, yeah.
So, what were you going to do with yourself at that point?
uh, I don't know. I really didn't have, I thought I'd go to DC. which I did. I went and worked in DC. And then, I had just a crazy career, just sort of this roller coaster career. And,
But help me
you
start
know,
you at the beginning of it, because my impression at the time was that you were having a little bit of difficulty working it out, figuring it out, because I felt like you weren't fully deployed the way you could have been in whatever the jobs were. But what
yeah.
were the first couple of things you did?
Um, I worked for the energy department. So there was this whole thing where price controls on oil and people were flipping, oil from what was old oil where there was a price control where they would get a higher price. So like Mark Rich was a famous case that I got to work partly on. He was the guy that ran off
The
and
criminal.
eventually, right. Eventually, Clinton pardoned him and years later. And so I did that. And then I ended up, I worked for a small law firm where he was representing trade associations, and I did that. And I worked for a law firm for a while. I hated that. I just wasn't meant to be a lawyer, just
Yeah,
sort of a lawyer in terms of litigation or anything.
yeah.
Mike, I would always say, you asked me about Harvard. I think what I found about going to Harvard was the real adjustment was there were so many guys and women who were playing so far above the rim. And, I could barely jump off the floor. You, you know, and it was pretty intimidating.
I think you're
And I,
underestimating yourself, but I get you. I hear you. I felt the
well,
same way, of course.
Mike, some of the interviews that you've done with some of these individuals, they're extraordinary minds. These people, a John Kiernan, he's a brilliant lawyer. A Kalori, they're brilliant. Robbie Kraft, these are geniuses.
Yeah,
And I was there thinking, what am I doing here? you know?
so there's that fish out of water again. But
Yeah,
it's the
yeah.
fish that ate Pittsburgh, I think, is a movie. But 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 what I'm really sort of driving at, the point I'm trying to make, kind of maybe forcing it on you a little bit, is that not everybody gets off to a fast start.
right.
It can take a long time to kind of figure out that part. Now, having said that, Joel, I got off to a very fast start. My problem was I hit a wall later on, but I got off to a fast start. But
Yeah,
so
you did.
were you really starting to doubt yourself? Like, were you thinking like, I'm an imposter. What am I going to do? Or were you kind of like, was it motivating you as well?
I don't know, Mike. A lot of times I felt like I was going through life sort of either like the guy on a girder where he's sleepwalking and the next one comes up and something works out. And I think one of the real breaks I got was I had a friend who had gotten a job at PepsiCo through a recruiter in DC. And he turned that recruiter on to me. And I ended up getting a job with the National Association of Chain Drugstores, which is sort of a yawner until you realize that the guy running it was Ron Ziegler, who was Nixon's press secretary,
Yeah.
who
What was he
was,
like?
Mike, I've only met one person in my life who I would say metamorphosized themselves into another human being. And he literally was like metamorphosized himself into Nixon.
Oh, okay.
Like, yeah, it was crazy. Like for example, when he was served coffee in the office, he ordered a full set of like china cups and saucers, and he had to be served on it with the logo of the. It was it was nuts,
He was over
And
the
he
top.
fired the whole staff within 18 months
Hmm.
completely. It was. I'll never forget. There was a night where he had all the political vice presidents from the various chain drugstores in this room, and some guy who worked for him, who was really sort of a sinister fellow, had written him a note saying, you're going to be done, signed BB Rebozo. And he
Now he was a Nixon confidant. For those
yes, he
who
was
don't remember, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
and he flipped out. So well, it was really interesting and fun. It was really bizarre.
How long were you
But
there?
what I was there probably 18 months,
Okay.
and then I ended up uh, when I left there, the chairman of Rite Aid called me and he said, "Hey, I'd like you to come up and work for us." And so that was a whole, introduced me into a whole different thing. And then I got into the business side as opposed to the political side of
So that
things.
was a big break too, obviously, right?
A
Because
big break.
so
Yeah.
so my recollection again is that at Rite Aid, you were able to sort of create something out of nothing. It felt like from looking at it from a distance, in that you understood. I'm going to get this wrong partially, at least, but you understood the importance of health maintenance organizations, HMOs,
Right.
take it from there. How did what did you get to Rite Aid? What was the opportunity? It's a big company, right? So you see an
Right.
opportunity for you. What did you see that others did not?
Yeah. Well, they brought me in first as an attorney to work on some of their contracts, but it became it became apparent to me pretty quickly that they did not understand this evolving managed care world, and they got frozen out of a lot of these groups. So their script volume was dependent upon being able to
Script
service
the
this emerging market,
prescriptions,
right?
yeah, the prescriptions. Yep.
So I sort of under cover of night, they didn't even realize I was doing it. I got into this and started reaching out to these various HMOs. And, this was really the early days where these companies like United Healthcare and Express Scripts and things and Medco, they were in their infancies.
Mm.
And so, I started developing those relationships. So that, from there, that was great. That went very, very well for me. And
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. As I recall it, and I think maybe our mutual friend Charlie Smith told me this, but that you figured out a way to get a piece of the action. And that's what I'm
well,
really interested. How did you do that? What I mean, you're in a big corporation.
yeah.
So what's that conversation like?
Well, the founder was this guy Alex Grass, and his brother-in-law was Lou Lehrman, who just died, who ran for governor against Cuomo.
Yeah.
So right, so but he left after he lost the governorship, the race for governor in New York. And so Alex Grass was the chairman, and his son was the president. And we were a similar age. And so, I got along as well as you could with him. But, this managed care side, was really starting to produce some real numbers. And I don't know, sometimes you just take a risk. And I said, look, I want to get a percentage of what I bring in terms of the revenue. And, I guess in some ways it was the Woody Allen joke, about why don't you tell your brother, that your brother thinks he's a chicken. Why don't you tell him? He says, we can't afford to lose the eggs, you know, uh, uh, you, you know,
That's funny.
and, so that was sort of the story. I was bringing in so much business, and, he didn't have anybody else. And, the other thing, Mike, that I found out that really helped me out. I was literate. I could write a memo, and and Grass, my boss, he was well educated. Well, most of these guys that were there who were in these positions, they didn't communicate like that. So it was a big advantage to me. So I would write him these strategy papers, and he would say, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's great. Let's do this." So that was my advantage.
You had his ear. And so you did make some money there. How long were you there, Joel, before you had to leave?
About 7 years, I think.
And you saw that trouble was brewing
Yes, there was trouble brewing.
of a legal nature.
Yes, yes. So what happened is, he had a voracious appetite to expand. The son actually forces out the dad,
Mm,
which was another just a crazy situation.
yeah.
But he takes over, and you know, uh, so I'm making good money there, and it becomes apparent to the old guard that's there. They're saying, "Hey, w- we have to separate him from the guy who's now the CEO." So that ends, and you know
They didn't like you making that money.
they didn't like me making that money, and they didn't like the closeness of the relationship because they didn't want anybody who could expose them for not doing their jobs well. Is what it came down to.
And the company got into trouble, didn't it, eventually?
Yeah, it got into trouble. So they ended up. We tried to buy Revco, which was a very large chain,
Yeah.
historic chain. The FTC stopped it, and that's the point I left because they had wanted me to ditch these documents that the FTC wanted, and I refused to do that. And so after that, they went out and bought a big chain in California, which they were not capable of running.
Mm,
And at that point, they wanted to do a secondary offering,
mm.
and things were going really bad, and they basically fudged the numbers, bad, more than fudged them badly, and it came back to bite them in the ass, and
Yeah.
most of them went to jail.
Yeah. And you were out of there. I knew you were concerned, and you had already left. So that's when I last saw you. You had a beautiful home in Maryland with a lovely. I still remember the pool outside, a beautiful property.
Yeah.
And you'd made some money, so I was thinking like, wow, JF has really figured this thing out. This is pretty cool. um and but you still, at that point you're only like 40, right?
Yeah.
You're
Yes.
still
Yes.
really young, so you can't do nothing. And I do want to mention that your brother, and I want was he in Columbia, Maryland? Do I
He
have
was
that?
in Columbia.
Yeah,
Correct.
your
Correct.
brother in
Yeah.
Columbia, Maryland had a pharmacy.
Right.
And so you had some, contact with pharmacists both at Rite Aid, but also it was a family thing. And so you saw an opportunity there, didn't you?
Well, what happened was I had started another business, which was this business focused on post acute care. The idea that you would take people into step down units. It, it was my first uh, time that I really dealt with VCs, which hey, it turned out all right in the future, but not with that one.
Yeah.
And then what happened is Blue Cross of Maryland, which had been a staff model HMO, everything was internal. They decided to sell off these pharmacies, and I bought them. I was able to get the bank to lend me some money, and I bought these pharmacies from them. So I had that for like 4 or 5
How
years.
many pharmacies?
I think there were 5 of them, Mike.
Uh huh.
And then I sold those off, and then there was a family feud that got involved with all of this. So
A family, your family, or a different family?
my family feud, my family feud. Yeah,
I mean, didn't you? I don't want to, Well, I guess
that's all right.
I do want to pry. That's what I do. But
Yeah.
um, but what happened?
Well, my brother went into this was he had connected me and said, they're selling these pharmacies. Do you want to buy them? I said, sure, sure. I'll take a shot at it. And I met with
Yeah.
the powers that be. I said, okay. I go to a meeting. He said, can I tag along? I don't have any interest. And I said, sure, you can come along. So at the meeting, right there at the meeting, I said, I'm buying these things. And the guys, so we walk out. My brother says, how are you going to do that? I said, I'm going to do it. And as the deal progresses, he says, well, I want to be a partner.
Yeah. Sure.
And I said, Les, that wasn't the deal. But my parents were aging. I didn't want to get in a fight with my parents. So I said, okay. Uh, And then, one thing led to another. He doesn't do anything. He's supposed to put up money. I get a call from the bank that he doesn't have any collateral, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So
So it didn't
it,
work.
it, it wasn't good, Mike.
It wasn't pretty. So,
It wasn't
but
good.
you got out of it.
Yeah.
You got out of it, and you turned your focus, if I have the story right, toward people with a really serious mental issues. Is that what happened?
Yes. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, you sort
Why
of,
was that area? Why did you mark that out for yourself? What was it about that?
well, you sort of go back to what you know, right? I mean, look how many times you've gone back to you get a comfort level and an understanding of an area, and you go back to it. So, what had happened is my brother and I got into this huge fight.
Hmm.
There was a trustee appointed. The pharmacies got sold off. So I'm hanging out for about 6 months, and the opportunity goes back to buy a couple of them back because the guys had been so mismanaged after they were sold off. And what did they say? Necessity's the mother of invention. I had to figure out how to build this business. And I sort of stumbled into this situation where this agency, a pharmacy, has just called them and said CVS bought them and that they were no longer going to service them. And this was a group that dealt with people with severe mental illness.
Mm.
They have them in group homes, or they take care of them when they're in independent housing, but they take care of them. And so I got into that and I thought, wow, what an unmet need right now for somebody to go in and really be able to do a more sophisticated way of approaching pharmaceutical care for people who really have, I mean, these were people with severe mental
Mm.
illness. And so, just one thing led to another, and that's what happened.
And
So it
so
was sort of,
is that a big niche?
well, I think it's become a big niche. I think carrying, I think that's an area, I don't think it was at that time.
Hmm.
It was just, it just happened, and it became apparent every time I picked up a new group, the need for it, or the word would get out. So that business grew, which was, it was great. It was all of a sudden, and we were doing some real good.
Yeah.
This was beyond just giving a prescription to somebody over the counter. This was really figuring out a way to, the focus was on how do you increase adherence among people who are severely mentally ill.
Adherence means they take the pills. The follow through
Yes.
is there, and you developed a dispensary essentially, like in the home.
Yeah. So what happened? You probably see it now. Like Amazon has it. They bought it from some. There's a machine that packs the meds in these little packs.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen that.
Well, I have Dividose myself,
Yeah. Okay.
so it's great. Actually, it's great.
Right. So what I did was I bought this technology, which was not proprietary. It was an expensive piece of equipment. That would pack these meds. But then, because I was so involved on this on the ground level, where I would deliver meds, Mike, I would get in my car and I would drive down to the agencies and I would knock on doors. I mean, look, I was never afraid of hard work.
No.
I would stay at the pharmacy on a Friday night and sweep the floors because they had to be swept. That's what I did. And so,
That's the newsboy in Duquesne, man.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
You know, it's my grandfather, doing just at the grocery store. And so, yeah, so in talking to these agencies, it sort of became apparent that, wow, if you could figure out a way to do something where you could put these in their homes to make sure that you could remotely monitor them and make sure that their adherence levels were 50% and less. And these are people with severe and persistent mental illness.
Yeah.
They don't take their meds they go through, like a decompensation,
Yeah,
and they're
withdrawals, all sorts of things. Yeah.
all sorts of things, all sorts of things. Yeah. So I ended up, I started plowing all the money back in from the pharmacy back into developing this device. And, it really differentiated our product from what anybody else was out there doing. And then I think I write in the Red Book thing, we got 2 NIH grants on this.
Yeah.
And so that was, yeah, it was great. That was a very, really satisfying thing.
People are down on hardware, but sometimes there are things that where you really need hardware, and it can do what happened with your company exactly. So when you grew that business, how big did it get? And then you sold it, right?
Yeah, I sold it. I sold it, yeah, to a private equity group right at the end of 2021. And then I sold 75% of the business to them.
Hmm.
And yeah, that was great. And then actually this past Friday, they sold it off. So
So you got another
it was a,
payday.
it was a good day.
Yeah, good for
Friday,
you.
Friday was a good day.
That's amazing, Joel. So you've
Yeah.
been super successful at least three times that I've counted, but now you've also got something going with one of your sons in the hotel business, right?
Right, right, right. Yeah. So yeah, that's been a lot of fun.
Well, what's happening there? What are you doing with your kid?
Well, so, he had spent summers, Mike, in Lexington, Kentucky. So he was where he went to the hotel school at Cornell, and he was working in the city in Manhattan, and he had been working for Cushman. And then he got hired by a family office in New York. That I don't know, the Brodsky family. That if you go around town, I think they own 10,000, units through Manhattan and Brooklyn. And
Wow.
he called me. Yeah, so he was an analyst for them. And he called me one day. He said, "Dad, I can't spend the rest of my life looking at a computer. I got to get out of here." So he was going to come into the business. And at that time, my wife and I were splitting. And he said, I can't come in the business. She's going to flip out. So,
Right.
so I said, okay, okay, okay. He said, so I think I want to go back to Lexington. I like Lexington. So he went to Lexington, and it's a long story, but and I'll tell it to you another time when we're together because it's a crazy story. But he finds this property where this married couple, these two women with triplets, get into this huge fight over this property that they own, and they enter into an auction where whoever bids the highest, the other turns it over to them, and he attaches himself to one of them, and 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 so we're able to provide funding. He gets it, and she turns around and she tries to steal the business back from him, the
Oh, geez.
property. Yeah, this is part of the crazy story, but anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, she you know we're fortunate because it goes to litigation. We keep the property, and at that point he has this idea to build this hotel. And as I mentioned, it's during COVID. He goes to 20 banks. They all turn him down
Hmm.
for a loan, for the construction loan.
Hmm.
And the 21st, he meets a local guy who's this wild guy, you know, and he happens to be on the board of the local bank. And he walks him into the bank and he says, "You're going to loan this kid money." So so they lend it like 50%, a construction loan, and he raises the money in Lexington. And so we build this hotel.
Wow.
And yeah, and it's the craziest thing how
How
it
that
just,
happened?
yeah, and
What's the name of the hotel, Joel?
it's called the Manchester.
The Manchester. Okay, so if you're in
Yeah.
Lexington, classmates, definitely stay at the Manchester.
Oh, it's the only place anyone's going to go in Manchester. I mean, in Lexington is
Right.
the Manchester.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's a funny
So
story.
I gave you a story about the Manchester, Mike. So uh, Apple uses Corning, who has a plant about 20 miles from Lexington for their glass.
Okay. The Gorilla Glass, the
If I
famous Gorilla Glass. Yeah, for on the iPhone.
Yeah, right. I can tell you there was one night that if a bomb had hit the Manchester, it would have wiped out the entire senior staff of Apple, including Tim Cook.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
They were
yeah,
all there.
yeah,
That's
yeah. They were all there.
that's exciting. Well, listen,
Yeah,
we've got a few minutes left. I wanted something I noticed in your red book, and by the way, I'm glad you got it to me. I'm glad I have the red book. It's helped a lot. It's really funny. Some people just go on and on and on. You had a nice, you had a lot to say, but you started with um, the Holocaust. Actually, you said there were a couple of only
yeah,
two of your relatives. Correct me if I'm wrong. Survived the Holocaust, which means
correct.
that you know however many, maybe you can tell us, did not survive it.
I don't, Mike. I don't even know. I mean, they were. Most of the family was there. I mean, very few of the members of the family had come over. And as I wrote, my grandparents with my mom arrived literally 3 weeks, before the gates closed in January of 1924.
Where
So
did they arrive from?
they arrived from what had at that time been what was called Ruski Polski, because you didn't know whether you were in Russia or in Poland. But
Okay.
now it's Ukraine.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Now it's Ukraine. Yeah,
Interesting. And they came to Ellis Island, right?
yeah. Came to Ellis Island,
And
right?
why? How did the family end up in Pittsburgh?
A great aunt had come about 10 years before,
Hmm.
and the dowry and my grandmother's dowry were tickets to America,
Oh,
which my grandfather tried to take the money and he was going to invest in some crazy thing. And of course, my grandmother said, I'm taking the baby. We're going to America. If you want to come along.
yeah, yeah.
He
That's
said on second thought, I'm coming.
yeah, yeah. Well, listen, you are the continuation of that story, and you've done. It sounds like you've done really well, Joel. I'm surprised. No, just kidding. Uh,
I am too, Mike.
but it's like what I would say to you. So there's all these smart people at Harvard, but you had something very few people at Harvard have, which is you're street smart. You're street smart. You're like brains on the ground, and not. I don't think many people have that. I think that's a real gift, and it certainly served you well, right? But I
You,
wanted.
you know, yeah, go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
you
I'm
go.
sorry.
You go. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, there's an element where I think you have this element of willingness to take risk,
Yeah.
often stupidly, but you do.
Yeah.
That's sort of the entrepreneur's what's unique to the entrepreneur.
That's the gene. That's sort of the
Yeah,
gene.
that's
I
the
call
gene.
it the sickness. It just never ends. But we're also lucky, you and I and our classmates, to have come of age. At a time when the personal computer was arriving, when software was
Yes,
happening. Bill Gates was and Steve Ballmer. I think Bill Gates was two classes ahead of us. Steve Ballmer was one class behind us, I believe. I think
right.
I have that right. So the guys who did Microsoft and were there. And the famous moment was when Paul Allen went out to Out of Town News. Remember Out of Town News, the big newspaper?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I didn't know
and
this.
found a computer magazine that had the first personal computer on the cover.
I
And
didn't.
yeah,
Is that right?
yeah, this is a true story. And he came back and he found Bill Gates. They were friends from Washington, he came back and he said, you got to leave school. We got to
Uh-huh.
do this, and that's kind of how the whole thing started. So, point being that we were lucky in a lot of ways, but one of the ways we were lucky was just we were born at a time when the technology was going to explode, and then of course 15 years later, the web and the internet, and that's the wave we've all been riding, ever since. And now it's AI. I think someday it'll be quantum computing, but we've been fortunate to sort of be around when that happened. We got off the typewriters, you know what I mean? We got off the typewriters and on the computer.
Mike, Mike, I always said that growing up, the biggest innovation I remember was the push button phone.
The princess too, yeah. The little,
Right, right.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah. It saved a lot of time. No, no. I mean, you forget how long it took to go like this, and then like
right,
you can't even describe how long it took. It's so slow.
right.
But so JF, you're we're people like to say they're on the back nine. We're way on the back of the back nine. But are there any things you'd like to do before, business or pleasure, whatever, before you punch the time clock for the last time?
Yikes, yikes. Don't
Go ahead.
describe it like
You
that,
must have
Mike.
thought it. You must have thought about
Uh, yeah, well, look, I think right now I'm starting. Look, I have no. The crazy thing, Mike, and it's for another discussion. But I have three kids. Not one of them's married. There are no grandchildren at this point. So I got to think about what I'm going to do here, and and I would think, I'll probably do a lot more like philanthropic stuff, which
it.
is
Yeah.
like okay, but I'm not dismissing that. I'm just saying
No.
I'm not gonna start another business, right? At
Right.
this point.
Right.
It's
Well,
enough.
that's probably smart. I would think that's smart. Well, listen, it is fantastic to talk to you. You're one of my best friends at Harvard, and particularly on the last year at Harvard. Like when you get involved in a political campaign, it's a whole nother level. And
Mike,
ironically,
do you have do we still have 1 minute here?
oh sure,
Do you remember when we were in Quincy and the guy comes in who is like wacky, and he parks his like what Coupe de Ville in front of the Quincy shipyard, and we get these calls. Do you remember this guy?
I
And
do vaguely. You're going to have to remind me. I do remember something happening. Yes.
or another time he came in and we said, how are you affording all of these signs? And he holds up this thing and there's like 15 credit cards that like fall out of his wallet. And and it was then I realized how crazy the type of people that these campaigns can attract. That it's just
Did you think of that when you started the mental health business?
well, you know what? I thought of that guy.
Yeah.
Sure. I thought, wow,
Yeah.
this is the type of people we're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. Really in need, and nobody really helping them, right?
Yeah, right. And I remember that the last thing about that is that the election night when Bai is just getting hammered. I don't know. Did he outdo Ellen McCormick or not? I can't remember.
He
Remember
got
the
5%.
anti-abortion candidate,
He got five
right?
percent. I think maybe he edged her out, but he got crushed. He was out of the race the
Yeah,
next day.
yeah. And there's a call from the hospital that the guy has been admitted to the psych ward.
Oh, I didn't know that. Like
Yeah,
it broke him. It kind of broke
I,
him.
I, I don't know, but I remember that he was decompensating. It seemed like in the last couple of days
Yeah.
because we were just trying to get him out of there.
Well,
Yeah.
wouldn't
So
we
anyway,
wouldn't we say today that he was manic or bipolar? He was in a manic phase, probably.
for sure. Right.
Right. He
Right.
he like he was treatable, but he didn't know that. We didn't know that, and he was just off the wall. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that experience, and also, if you want to take some really important advice away from this podcast, remember never pay for soda in a restaurant. It's a
Never.
really bad idea. It's bad for you and it's expensive. So, Just don't do that. That's our advice for the next 20 years, right, JF? Listen,
Hey, and
it's always a pleasure. I feel like this is, it's always a pleasure. I think this is, I feel like this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. So, so we'll talk again soon. Okay. And
all right. See you next week.
see you at the reunion. Bye bye
All
now.
right. See
Bye.
you, Mike.
You can